My name is Lola Hughes. I'm 32 years old, a sergeant in the 82nd Airborne Division. I survived ambushes in the sandbox of the Middle East, dodged IEDs, and buried friends. But I never imagined the most dangerous enemy I would ever face was waiting for me right inside my father's living room. The sharp smell of antiseptic is burning my nose, mixing with the metallic taste of blood filling my mouth. I am lying on the cold tile floor of a private clinic in Iron Creek, Montana, clutching my lower abdomen. The empty space where my 14-week-old baby was ripped away from me just hours ago. Standing over me is Will, my stepbrother. He just backhanded me across the face, and I can feel my fresh surgical stitches tearing, warm blood soaking into the gauze. He throws a stack of legal papers at my face and sneers. "Sign it, you useless grunt. You losing that baby is God's punishment. Don't try to use that tragedy to beg for money. The house and the old man's insurance belong to me." He thinks I am a wounded animal waiting to die. He doesn't know that my father left a secret weapon in the basement, something that is going to turn his comfortable life into absolute hell. Comment justice below and hit subscribe if you believe anyone who steals their family's blood and sweat deserves to face a reckoning. The impact of the slap didn't just sting my skin, it rattled my teeth. My head snapped to the right, and for a second, the humming of the fluorescent lights in the clinic hallway was replaced by a high-pitched ringing. Tinnitus. I knew that sound. It was the sound of a bomb going off too close. But there were no bombs here in Iron Creek. Just the heavy, suffocating silence of a Montana winter outside and the heavy breathing of a coward standing above me. Everything felt like it was moving in slow motion. I watched a droplet of blood from my split lip hit the pristine white linoleum. Drip. "Look at you," Will spat, his voice dripping with mock pity. He adjusted the cuffs of his expensive suit jacket, a suit I knew he bought on credit. "You look pathetic, Lola. A real soldier? Please, you're just a broken thing. A barren, broken thing." I tried to push myself up, my palms sliding against the slick floor. My military training screamed at me to react. Target acquired. Threat level imminent. Neutralize. My muscles tensed, ready to spring, to drive my knee into his groin and put him on the floor where he belonged. But then, the pain hit. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a jagged, tearing fire in my lower belly. I gasped, the air leaving my lungs in a rush. My hand flew to my stomach instinctively. Just yesterday, there was a heartbeat there. A small, rhythmic thumping that gave me a reason to come home, a reason to leave the army, a reason to hope. Now there was only raw, inflamed tissue and a hollow emptiness that felt heavier than a rucksack full of gear. The surgical incision from the emergency procedure was fresh, and Will's violence had likely popped a stitch. I collapsed back onto my elbows, gritting my teeth so hard I thought they might crack. I refused to scream. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Will laughed. It was a dry, hollow sound. He kicked the papers he had thrown closer to my face. "Dad is dead because you weren't here, Lola. You were off playing G.I. Jane while his heart gave out. And now you come back, dragging your baggage, thinking you're going to get a piece of the pie?" He leaned down, his face inches from mine. I could smell the stale bourbon on his breath, masked by peppermint gum. "Sign the waiver. Renounce the inheritance. Mom and I deserve that insurance money. We took care of him. You? You're just a guest who overstayed her welcome." I need a doctor," I wheezed out. "You need a reality check," Will hissed. He straightened up, looming over me like a conqueror. "You're not a woman, Lola. You're barely even a man. You couldn't even keep a baby alive. How do you expect to keep a house?" Those words cut deeper than shrapnel. Barren. Failure. The accusations swirled in my head, mixing with the physical agony. A nurse finally ran around the corner, her eyes widening in horror. "Oh my God, Ms. Hughes!" She rushed to my side, dropping to her knees. She glared up at Will. "Sir, you need to leave immediately. I'm calling the sheriff." Will didn't even flinch. He just smirked, adjusting his tie. "Go ahead, sweetheart. Call Sheriff Miller. Tell him Will Henderson is here handling a domestic dispute. Ask him if he wants to arrest his golf partner." The nurse froze, her hand hovering over her phone. In a small town like Iron Creek, the law wasn't written in books. It was written in handshakes and favors at the local country club. Will knew he was untouchable. "I'm leaving," Will said, stepping over my legs as if I were a bag of trash. He paused at the door, not looking back. "If you come to the house, Lola, I'll have you arrested for trespassing. That's private property now. Veronica doesn't want to see your face." The heavy clinic door swung shut behind him, the latch clicking with a finality that echoed in my bones. "I'm so sorry, honey, I'm so sorry," the nurse whispered, her hands trembling as she checked my bandages. "The bleeding, it started again. Let me get the doctor." "No," I rasped. I grabbed her wrist, perhaps a little too tightly. My blue eyes, usually cold and disciplined, were burning. "Help me up." "You can't stand, you've lost blood." "Help me up." It was an order, not a request. The sergeant in me had taken the wheel because the grieving mother was too weak to drive. With her help, I dragged myself to the vertical. The room spun. Black spots danced in my vision. I stumbled toward the small sink and mirror in the corner of the examination room. I gripped the porcelain edges, my knuckles turning white. I looked at the reflection staring back at me. Short blonde hair, matted with sweat. Pale skin. A bruise already blooming violet across my cheekbone. A split lip. And eyes that looked like broken glass. I saw a woman who had lost her father. I saw a woman who had lost her child. I saw a victim. I reached for a paper towel and wiped the blood from my chin. I wiped away the victim. I remembered the words of General George S. Patton, a quote my father used to make me recite when I wanted to quit track and field in high school. "If you are going through hell, keep going." "I'm in hell," I whispered to the empty room. My voice didn't shake this time. But I'm not stopping. I looked down at the blood-stained waiver form on the floor. Will thought he had won. He thought he had broken me. He thought the battlefield was his because he struck the first blow while I was down. He forgot one thing. You don't ambush a paratrooper and expect them to stay down. You finish the job, or you prepare for war. "I'm coming for you, Will," I said, the words tasting like iron and ash. "And I'm taking everything." I turned to the nurse, who was watching me with a mix of fear and awe. "Where are my clothes?" I asked. "I'm checking out." "But you have nowhere to go," she stammered. "I'm going home," I said, buttoning my torn shirt over the bandages. "Even if I have to kick the door down." The war wasn't in the Middle East anymore. It was right here in Iron Creek, and I was just getting started. The windshield wipers of my father's old Ford F-150 slapped back and forth, fighting a losing battle against the Montana snow. It was coming down hard now, thick, wet flakes that stuck to everything they touched. My heater was blasting at full volume, but I couldn't stop shivering. The cold wasn't just outside, it was inside me, radiating from the empty space in my womb, from the fresh bruising on my cheek, and from the hollow ache in my chest, where my heart used to be. I drove on autopilot, the tires crunching over the familiar gravel roads leading to the outskirts of Iron Creek. All I wanted, all I needed in the entire world right now, was my bed. The twin bed in the corner room on the second floor, the room that smelled like old cedar and lemon polish. I wanted to curl up under the quilt my grandmother stitched and sleep until the pain stopped screaming. I pulled into the long driveway. The house stood there like a fortress against the gray sky. It was a sturdy, two-story craftsman that my father had built with his own hands 30 years ago. The porch light was on, casting a warm, golden glow on the snow. For a second, I let myself believe that Dad would open the door, smelling like sawdust and tobacco, and tell me everything was going to be okay. But Dad was in the ground, and the devil was in the living room. I killed the engine. The silence of the truck was instantly replaced by the howling wind. I wrapped my thin jacket tighter around myself. It wasn't enough for this weather. And limped toward the front porch. The snow soaked through my sneakers instantly. I reached into my pocket, my fingers brushing against the cold metal of my house key. I knew every jagged edge of that key by heart. I jammed it toward the lock. Clink. It hit metal, but it didn't slide in. I blinked, wiping snowflakes from my eyelashes. The old brass deadbolt, scratched from years of use, was gone. In its place was a sleek, black digital keypad with a blue, glowing ring. A smart lock. My stomach dropped. I tried the handle. Locked. "Open the door," I shouted, pounding on the wood. "Will, let me in." Movement caught my eye. To the left of the door, the large bay window offered a clear view into the living room. I stepped back, peering through the glass. Inside, a fire was roaring in the stone hearth. It looked so warm. Standing there was Veronica. She was wearing a cashmere cardigan that probably cost more than my monthly army paycheck. She held a steaming ceramic mug in both hands, cradling it near her face. She looked right at me. Her eyes were devoid of anything human. No anger, no pity, just a flat, terrifying indifference. She took a slow sip of her tea, the steam rising around her perfectly coiffed hair. Then, with a casual flick of her wrist, she reached out and pulled the heavy velvet drapes shut. The view of the fire vanished. I was left alone in the freezing dark. "Veronica!" I screamed, kicking the door. A sharp pain shot up my abdomen, reminding me of my surgery. I doubled over, gasping. That's when I saw it. To the right of the porch, down in the muddy slush of the side yard, was a pile. At first, I thought it was trash bags awaiting pickup, but then I saw a flash of midnight blue and gold. My breath hitched. I stumbled off the porch, my feet sliding in the mud. I fell to my knees, the ice water soaking instantly into my jeans, stinging my surgical wounds. It was my life. They had thrown my life onto the lawn. My high school yearbooks were swollen with water. My track and field trophies were broken. The little gold runners snapped off at the ankles. But that wasn't what made me choke on a sob. Lying half buried in the slush was my dress blues. The Army service uniform I'd worn when I received my commendations. The heavy wool jacket was soaked, heavy with mud. The gold stripe on the trousers, the stripe that signifies an officer or NCO, was stained brown. "No," I whispered, my hands shaking as I reached for it. "No, no, no." To a civilian, it's just clothes. To a soldier, that uniform is your soul. It's the sweat of basic training, the blood of deployment, the friends you buried while wearing it. To treat it like garbage, it was a desecration. I frantically tried to wipe the mud off the jacket, but I was just smearing it deeper into the fabric. My tears were hot on my freezing cheeks. Then I saw the wood splinters. My mother's jewelry box. The one thing I had left of her. It had been smashed open against a rock. The velvet lining was torn out. And there, scattered in the white snow like drops of frozen milk, were her pearls. The necklace she wore on her wedding day. The string had been cut. I started scrabbling in the snow, my fingers numb and red, trying to pick up the individual pearls. One here, one there. I was hyperventilating, the panic rising in my throat. Click. The sound of the front door opening made me freeze. I looked up from the mud. Will was standing on the porch. He was wearing loafers and holding a tumbler of amber liquid. He didn't step down onto the wet grass. He wouldn't ruin his shoes. "You're making a mess, Lola," he said, his voice bored. "You threw my mother's pearls in the snow," I said, my voice trembling with a rage so pure it felt like lava. "You threw my uniform in the mud." "I was cleaning out the junk," Will said. He whistled. "Duke, come here, boy." From behind him, a massive Doberman pinscher trotted out. Its ears were cropped, its muscles rippling under a sleek black coat. It growled low in its throat when it saw me, sensing the tension. "This is private property now," Will said, taking a sip of his bourbon. "The deed is in my name as the executor. You are trespassing." "This is my home." I stood up, clutching my muddy uniform to my chest. "Not anymore. You have 10 seconds to get off my land before I let Duke loose. And after that, I'm calling Sheriff Miller to report a vagrant harassing us." Will smiled. It was the smile of a man who held all the cards. "Get lost, G.I. Jane. Go find another war to lose." Duke barked, a sharp, aggressive sound that echoed off the trees. The dog lunged forward, straining against Will's grip on the collar. I looked at the house. I looked at the closed curtains where Veronica was drinking her tea. I looked at the pearls lost in the snow that I couldn't save. I had no weapon. I was bleeding. I was freezing. If I stayed, I would end up in a jail cell or a hospital bed, and they would win. I backed away. "You're going to pay for this, Will," I said, my voice remarkably steady. "Every pearl, every stain, you're going to pay." "Tick-tock, Lola," he sneered. I turned and limped back to my truck, my boots squelching in the mud. I threw the soiled uniform onto the passenger seat. It smelled like wet wool and dirt. As I climbed into the cab and slammed the door, I looked down at my hand. In my death grip, I was holding a single object I had managed to salvage from the mud. It wasn't a pearl. It was a challenge coin my father had given me when I graduated boot camp. On one side, it had the Army emblem. On the other, it had a quote from Psalm 23:4. "I will fear no evil." I wasn't alone. There was one person left in this godforsaken town who knew what honor meant. One person who hated Will almost as much as I did. If you are listening to this and you have ever felt the heartbreak of seeing your family destroy everything you hold dear, or if you've ever had to walk away from your own home to survive, please hit that like button right now. Leave a comment below saying, "I stand with Lola, so I know I'm not fighting this battle alone." I put the truck in reverse. I knew where I had to go. Margie's house was only 2 miles down the road, and she kept a bottle of bourbon that was older than Will and a shotgun that was cleaner than his conscience. The engine roared to life. I wasn't retreating. I was just moving to a new rally point. I don't remember parking the truck. I don't remember walking up the icy steps of the porch. The last 2 miles were a blur of white snow and black asphalt, driven by muscle memory and the desperate instinct of a wounded animal seeking a cave. Margie's cabin was small, built from rough-hewn logs that had turned silver with age, nestled back against the tree line like it was trying to hide from the world. But unlike my father's house, no, Will's house now, the windows here were glowing with a soft, inviting orange light. I didn't even have to knock. The heavy oak door swung open before my boot hit the welcome mat. Margie stood there, framed by the warmth behind her. She was 73 years old, but she stood with the posture of a woman who had weathered more storms than the roof over her head. She was wearing a thick flannel robe over her nightgown, and a thin cigarette burned between her fingers. She took one look at me, soaking wet, clutching a muddy challenge coin, shivering so hard my teeth were clicking together, and she didn't ask a single question. She didn't ask, "What happened?" or, "Why are you here?" "Get in here, kiddo," she said, her voice raspy from years of tobacco and straight talk. She reached out, her grip surprisingly strong, and pulled me across the threshold. The heat hit me like a physical wall, but in a good way. It smelled like wood smoke, old paper, and vanilla. It smelled like safety. "Boots off," Margie commanded, shutting the door against the howling wind and locking the deadbolt with a solid thud. "Sit by the fire. Don't touch anything until you stop looking like a drowned rat." I collapsed into the worn leather armchair by the stone hearth. The fire was crackling, consuming a thick log of pine. I stared at the flames, my mind completely blank. The adrenaline that had fueled my confrontation with Will was fading, leaving behind a cold, aching void. Margie bustled around the small kitchen. I heard the hiss of a kettle, the clinking of glass, and the heavy glug of a bottle being poured. Moments later, she shoved a steaming ceramic mug into my hands. "Drink," she said, pulling up a wooden stool to sit opposite me. I looked down at the dark liquid. "What is it?" "Hot cocoa," she said, taking a drag of her cigarette. Then she winked. "With a double shot of wild turkey. It's a Montana painkiller. It'll put the fire back in your belly." I took a sip. The sweetness of the chocolate hit my tongue first, followed immediately by the sharp, smoky burn of the bourbon. It traveled down my throat, warming my chest, spreading through my frozen limbs. "Thanks, Margie," I whispered. My voice cracked. That crack was the dam breaking. I tried to take another sip, but my hands started shaking so violently that the hot liquid sloshed over the rim, burning my fingers. I set the mug down on the floor and put my face in my hands. The sob that ripped out of my throat was ugly. It was the sound of something tearing. "I lost him, Margie," I choked out. "I lost the baby. And today, Will? He took the house. He threw Mom's pearls in the snow. He threw my uniform in the mud. Margie didn't say, "It's going to be okay." She didn't offer empty platitudes. She did something better. She reached out and placed her wrinkled, calloused hand on my knee and squeezed. "Breathe, Lola," she said softly. I failed. I wept, the tears dripping through my fingers. I failed Dad. I failed my baby. I'm a sergeant, Margie. I'm supposed to protect people. I couldn't even protect my own child. I looked up at her, my vision blurred. The Bible? Dad always made me read Psalm 23. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. I'm in the valley, Margie. I'm in the damn valley and I don't see the light. Margie put out her cigarette in a crystal ashtray. She stood up and walked to a small cabinet, retrieving a first aid kit. She knelt beside me, her knees popping with age. "Lift your shirt," she ordered gently. "Let me see those stitches." I obeyed. The bandage the clinic had put on was soaked through. Margie hissed through her teeth when she saw the angry red line of the incision and the fresh bruising from Will's violence. "Will did this?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. I nodded. "That son of a bitch," she muttered. She began to clean the wound with practiced efficiency. Her hands were steady. "You listen to me, Lola Hughes. You're in the valley of the shadow of death, yes. But remember the rest of the verse. I will fear no evil. You know why?" She looked me dead in the eye as she taped fresh gauze over my stomach. "Because you are the evil that they should fear. You are the meanest thing in that valley." I let out a shaky breath, the alcohol and her words settling my nerves. "I have nothing left, Margie. Will has the lawyers, the money, the house. He said Dad changed the will right before he died." Margie sat back on her heels. She picked up her bourbon, she drank it neat, no ice, no cocoa, and took a long pull. She looked at the fire for a long moment, as if debating whether to speak. "Your father didn't just die of a bad heart, Lola," she said quietly. The room went silent. The only sound was the popping of the firewood. "What do you mean?" I sat up straighter, ignoring the twinge of pain. "The coroner's report said cardiac arrest. Frank came to see me 2 days before he passed," Margie said. She swirled the amber liquid in her glass. "He looked haunted. He told me he felt sick every time he ate Veronica's cooking. Said he felt dizzy, confused. He was old, Margie. His heart was weak." "His heart was weak, but his mind was sharp as a tack," Margie snapped. "He came to me because he knew I used to be a forensic accountant for the county. He brought me a stack of papers he'd pulled from Will's construction company office." My blood ran cold. "Dad was investigating Will?" Margie nodded grimly. "Will has been bleeding the company dry. Buying sports cars, fancy dinners, gambling trips to Vegas, all written off as materials and labor. Frank found out. He was going to cut Will off. He was going to write him out of the will, not you." She leaned in closer, her eyes glittering in the firelight. "He told me, if anything happens to me, Margie, you tell Lola to look behind the water heater." He was scared, Lola. He knew they were doing something to him. "Behind the water heater?" I repeated, a memory flashing in my mind. The basement. The secret hiding spot where Dad used to keep his emergency fund when I was a kid. "I admit," Margie said, a mischievous smirk touching her lips, "I've been snooping. I watched Will's mail. I watched Veronica's trash. They are terrified, Lola. They aren't acting like grieving relatives. They're acting like criminals trying to cover their tracks." I reached down and picked up the mug of spiked cocoa. My hand wasn't shaking anymore. The grief was still there, heavy and crushing, but something else was growing alongside it. A cold, hard resolve. My father wasn't just neglected. He might have been murdered. And Will didn't just steal my inheritance, he stole the truth. "He told me I was useless," I said, my voice steady. "He told me to leave town." "Of course he did," Margie said, raising her glass in a toast. "Because he knows if you stay, you'll find out what he did." I clinked my mug against her glass. "I'm not leaving, Margie," I said. I'm going to find out what's behind that water heater, even if I have to burn the house down to get to it. Margie smiled, and it was a wolfish grin. That's my girl. Now finish your drink. We have work to do tomorrow. I woke up on Margie's floral couch with a stiff neck and a mouth that tasted like old copper pennies. The morning sun was streaming through the lace curtains, cutting through the haze of the previous night's whiskey and grief. For a split second, I forgot. I forgot about the baby, the house, the betrayal. Then the smell of frying bacon and the sharp ache in my abdomen brought it all rushing back like a landslide. I sat up, wincing. Margie was already in the kitchen, her silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, a pencil tucked behind her ear. She looked less like a retired grandmother and more like a general plotting a land war. "Coffee's in the pot," she said without turning around. "Drink up, we have intel." I limped to the counter, pouring a mug of black coffee. "Intel?" "Mrs. Patterson next door," Margie said, pointing a spatula toward the back door. She caught me taking out the trash. The woman has the ears of a bat and the mouth of a broadcast news anchor. But she told me something interesting. I walked out onto the back porch. The air was crisp, freezing the breath in my lungs. Mrs. Patterson was leaning over the chain-link fence, wrapped in a quilted down coat, clutching a thermos. "Morning, Lola," she called out, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I was just telling Margie how sorry I am about your father. Frank was a good man, a little paranoid toward the end, though." "Paranoid?" I asked, stepping closer to the fence. The soldier in me woke up. "Paranoia is just a heightened state of awareness." "Oh, yes," Mrs. Patterson nodded vigorously. "About 2 weeks ago, I saw him out in the backyard at 2 a.m. It was freezing, just like this. He was standing by that old rusty burn barrel he keeps near the shed." My grip on the coffee mug tightened. "What was he doing?" "Burning papers," she said. "Stacks of them. He was feeding them into the fire one by one, looking over his shoulder like he expected the Viet Cong to jump out of the bushes." I asked him if he was okay the next day, and he just told me he was cleaning house. But the look in his eyes, he looked scared, honey. OPSEC. Operational Security. My father wasn't cleaning house, he was destroying evidence. He was sanitizing the site so the enemy couldn't find the intel. And the enemy was sleeping in his guest room. I thanked Mrs. Patterson and went back inside. Margie was sitting at her small kitchen table, which was now covered in stacks of paper. Bank statements, invoices, tax returns. She had her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose and was aggressively tapping a calculator. "Mrs. Patterson confirmed it," I said, sitting opposite her. "Dad was destroying documents." "Well, he missed a few," Margie said, sliding a sheet of paper toward me. It was a printout from Henderson Construction's expense account. She had highlighted a line item in angry neon yellow. "Look at this." I read the line. March 12th. Roofing materials, job site. 4. Cost, $82,000. "That's a lot of shingles," I muttered. "There is no job site for," Margie said, her voice dripping with professional disdain. I checked the permit records at the county clerk's website this morning. No permits pulled. But you know what costs exactly $82,000 and appeared in Will's driveway 3 days after this check was cut? I looked up. The red Corvette. Bingo. Margie slammed her hand on the table. "He's embezzling, Lola. He's draining the company dry to fund his midlife crisis and pay off his gambling debts. He's listing luxury cars as construction materials. It's sloppy, it's stupid, and it's a felony." "But this is just the company money," I said, rubbing my temples. "Will said Dad changed the will. If Dad signed the house over to him, the embezzlement doesn't matter regarding the property." "Unless he was coerced," Margie pointed out. "Or unless your father found out and was gathering proof to send his own son to prison." I stared at the papers. My father was a man of honor. He wouldn't let Will steal from the company he built. He would have stopped it, unless he was stopped first. Suddenly, a memory flashed in my mind. It was the phone call I received from the hospital nurse the night Dad died. She said he was delirious, muttering nonsense. Will had laughed about it later, saying the old man had lost his marbles. Operation Alpha, Dad had whispered into the phone when the nurse held it to his ear. His voice was weak, raspy. Lola. Operation Alpha, behind the water heater. August 12th, 65. At the time, I thought it was the morphine talking. Dad hadn't run an Operation Alpha in Vietnam. August 12th, 1965 wasn't a battle date. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. It wasn't delirium, I whispered. Margie looked up. What? The nurse said he was confused, but he wasn't. He was giving me a sit rep, a situation report. I paced the small kitchen. He said Operation Alpha. That was his code for Mom. Alpha. Alice. My heart started pounding against my ribs. And the date. August 12th, 1965. That's not a random date. That's Mom's birthday. And the location? Margie asked, her eyes widening. Behind the water heater, I said. In the basement. He built a false wall there years ago to hide his emergency cache. He called it his fallback point. It all clicked into place. The burning of the documents in the barrel wasn't madness. It was a diversion. He destroyed the obvious papers to make Will think he was just old and confused, while he hid the real evidence, the smoking gun, in the one place Will would never look. Will was too lazy to go into the basement. He hated the dark. He hated getting his hands dirty. He hid the proof, I said, my voice hardening. He hid the proof of the embezzlement, maybe even a new will. He knew they were poisoning him, Margie. He knew he wouldn't make it until I got home, so he left a dead drop. Margie took off her glasses. If Will finds it. He won't, I said, because he thinks he's won. He thinks I'm a broken, grieving woman who's going to run away. I walked over to the fireplace where Margie kept a framed photo of my father and me at my boot camp graduation. In the photo, I was standing tall, chest out, proud. He was smiling. That rare, genuine smile that reached his eyes. I looked at my reflection in the glass of the frame. The woman who had been crying on the floor yesterday was gone. The woman who had been kicked out of her own home was gone. In her place stood Sergeant Lola Hughes. I turned to Margie. I need a flashlight, I need dark clothing, and I need a knife. Margie didn't hesitate. She stood up and walked to her pantry. I've got a tactical flashlight in the drawer, and my husband's old hunting knife is in the shed. I'm going in tonight, I said. 0200 hours, that's when the REM sleep cycle is deepest. Will passes out from the booze by midnight. Veronica takes sleeping pills. It's risky, Lola, Margie warned, though she was already pulling the flashlight out. If they catch you, it's burglary. It's not burglary, I said, checking the battery on the light. It clicked on, casting a bright, focused beam on the kitchen wall. It's a recovery mission. I looked out the window toward my father's house, looming gray and silent in the distance. Dad gave me one last order, I said softly. Operation Alpha. I'm going to complete the mission. The tears were dry. The sadness was boxed up and shoved deep down into the locker of my mind where soldiers keep their trauma until the war is over. Right now, I didn't have time to grieve. I had a perimeter to breach. The sun was beginning to dip below the tree line, casting long bruised shadows across the snow. Inside the cabin, the air was thick with tension. I was sharpening Margie's hunting knife with a whetstone, the rhythmic shh, shh sound filling the silence. Margie was at the table, organizing the financial documents into evidentiary piles. Then we heard the crunch of tires on gravel. I stopped sharpening. They're here. I expected them sooner, Margie said, not looking up. They're getting desperate. I moved to the window, peering through the lace curtains. It wasn't the police. It was Will's black SUV, the one he bought with company funds. He parked aggressively close to the porch steps, the tires spinning mud onto the clean snow. Veronica stepped out first. She was dressed for a funeral, not a neighborly visit. A long fur coat, leather gloves, and high boots. In her hand, she carried a wicker basket covered with a checkered napkin. It looked like something out of a Norman Rockwell painting, if Rockwell painted psychopaths. Will got out of the driver's side. He wasn't carrying a basket. He was dragging an aluminum baseball bat across the gravel. Skirt! Skirt! Stay here, Margie ordered, standing up. Negative, I said, sliding the knife into my belt at the small of my back. I've got your 6. We opened the front door just as they reached the steps. The cold air rushed in, biting at my face. Good evening, neighbors, Veronica chirped. Her voice was sugary sweet, the kind of tone you use when talking to a slow child or a dog you're about to put down. We just wanted to stop by and check on you, Margie, and bring you some of my blueberry muffins, fresh from the oven. She held out the basket. I could smell them, sweet, buttery, innocent. I don't eat carbs, Veronica, Margie said, leaning against the doorframe, her arms crossed. And I certainly don't eat anything prepared in a kitchen where poison is a spice. Veronica's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, then returned, tighter than before. Oh, Margie, you always did have such a colorful imagination. That's probably why poor Frank liked you. Birds of a feather. Will stepped up beside her. He tapped the head of the bat against the wooden railing of the porch. Tink, tink, tink. The sound was deliberate, menacing. Cut the crap, Mom, Will said. He looked at me, his eyes bloodshot and glassy. He was drunk again, or high, maybe both. We know you're helping her, old woman. We know she's staying here. It's a free country, William, Margie said. Last I checked, I can have whoever I want in my house. Not if they're trespassing on my patience, Will snarled. He swung the bat suddenly, smashing it into a terracotta pot filled with winter geraniums sitting on the railing. Crash! Shards of clay exploded outward. Dirt and frozen roots scattered across the porch floor. I flinched, my hand twitching toward my back, but Margie held up a hand to stop me. Will pointed the bat at Margie's chest. This is a warning. You're a lonely old woman living in a wooden box in the middle of nowhere. Wood burns fast in the winter, Margie. Faulty wiring, a stray spark. Accidents happen all the time. My blood boiled. He wasn't just threatening to evict me, he was threatening to burn an old woman alive in her sleep. Are you threatening me, boy? Margie asked. Her voice was deadly calm. I'm giving you advice, Will sneered. Kick Lola out tonight. Or maybe the fire department won't get here in time. Veronica sighed, adjusting her fur coat. Please, Margie, just be reasonable. We don't want anyone to get hurt. We just want peace. Margie stared at them for a long beat. Then, she reached her hand behind the doorframe. You know, Margie said conversationally, I've lived in Iron Creek for 73 years. I was here before your daddy met your mama. I was here before you were a glint in the milkman's eye. She pulled her hand back out. In it, she held a Remington 870 pump-action shotgun. The metal was dull and scratched, worn from decades of use. Clack, clack. The sound of her racking a shell into the chamber was louder than the wind. It was the universal language of, "Get off my lawn." Will jumped back, nearly tripping over his own feet. The bat hung loosely in his hand now. Veronica let out a small shriek, clutching her pearls. Jesus, you crazy hag, Will shouted. This is Montana, son, Margie said, lifting the barrel just enough to aim at Will's kneecaps. We have the castle doctrine here. You came onto my property, destroyed my property, and threatened my life. I am well within my rights to blow your legs off and let the coyotes finish the job. Her finger rested on the trigger. Her hand wasn't shaking. You have 5 seconds to get that ugly car off my driveway, Margie said. 1. Let's go, Will, Veronica hissed, grabbing his arm. Her face had lost all its color. The mask of the grieving widow had slipped, revealing the terrified coward underneath. You're going to regret this, Will yelled, backing away toward the car. I'll sue you. I'll own this shack. 2. Margie counted. They scrambled into the SUV. Will slammed the door so hard the vehicle rocked. He threw it into reverse, tires spitting gravel as they peeled out of the driveway. We watched until the taillights disappeared around the bend. Only then did Margie lower the gun. She let out a long breath, and for the first time, I saw her shoulders slump. She leaned the shotgun against the wall and rubbed her face. Are you okay? I asked, stepping closer. I hate that boy, she muttered. And I really liked that flower pot. She turned and walked back into the kitchen, heading straight for the cabinet where she kept her secret files. Come here, Lola. There's something you need to see. Something I found right before they pulled up. I followed her. She opened a manila folder labeled Veronica Henderson. Background check. I ran a trace on her maiden name, Margie said, spreading 3 death certificates on the table. Or should I say, her maiden names. I looked at the documents. 2010. Phoenix, Arizona. Deceased, Robert Miller. Cause of death, cardiac arrest. Spouse, Veronica Miller. 2014. Dallas, Texas. Deceased, James Stone. Cause of death, myocardial infarction. Spouse, Veronica Stone. 2018. Iron Creek, Montana. Deceased, Frank Hughes. Cause of death, heart failure. Spouse, Veronica Hughes. I felt the bile rise in my throat. It wasn't a coincidence. It was a business model. She's a black widow, I whispered. She marries older, wealthy men with no close family nearby. She waits 3 years, just long enough to be in the will. And then their hearts just stop, Margie finished. Digoxin. It's a heart medication. In small doses, it helps. In high doses or built up over time, it mimics a heart attack perfectly, especially if the victim already has a history of heart issues. I slammed my fist onto the table. She murdered him, and Will knows. Will is the accomplice, Margie said. He gets the company, she gets the insurance. They split the pot. I looked at the window. The darkness outside was total now. Somewhere out there, in my father's house, those 2 monsters were probably pouring a drink, celebrating their intimidation tactic. They thought they had scared us into submission. They thought the old lady and the broken soldier would pack up and leave. They were wrong. They threatened to burn us out, I said, my voice cold. That means they are scared. They know there is evidence left behind, and they are terrified we will find it. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 8 p.m. I'm not waiting for them to light a match, I said. I'm going in tonight. If there is proof behind that water heater, I am getting it. And then I am going to put Veronica in a cage where she can never hurt another old man again. Margie nodded. She reached into the drawer and pulled out the tactical flashlight. She handed it to me like she was handing a sword to a knight. Happy hunting, Sergeant. 0200 hours, the witching hour. The world outside was a canvas of monochromatic gray and white. The snow was falling heavier now, thick wet clusters that acted like a natural sound dampener. It was the perfect weather for an infiltration. Nature was providing me with cover. I crouched in the shadows of the rhododendron bushes lining the back of the house. My breath plumed in small white clouds that I quickly dispersed with a wave of my gloved hand. I was dressed in black thermal layers, a black beanie pulled low over my ears. I didn't look like a grieving sister anymore. I looked like what I was trained to be, a ghost. My target was the window well on the east side of the foundation. It was a corrugated metal semicircle, half filled with dead leaves and snow, guarding a small rectangular window that looked into the unfinished part of the basement. I slid into the well. The metal groaned softly, a sound that seemed deafening in the silence. I froze, waiting. Nothing. Just the wind howling through the eaves. I pulled Margie's hunting knife from my belt. I knew this window better than I knew the back of my hand. When I was 16, this was my escape route to sneak out to bonfires at the quarry. The latch had been broken since 1998. Dad knew, but he never fixed it. He just greased it so it wouldn't squeak. I slid the knife blade between the sash and the frame. With a gentle twist, the latch popped. Now came the hard part. I had to lift the window and slide my body through a space barely 18 inches wide. Under normal circumstances, this would be a simple tactical maneuver. But tonight, my body was a wreck. I pushed the window up. It slid smoothly. I garnered my strength and hoisted my upper body onto the sill. As soon as my abdominal muscles engaged, white-hot lightning exploded in my gut. I bit down on my tongue so hard I tasted copper. The stitches. It felt like someone was taking a seam ripper to my skin. Tears involuntarily sprang to my eyes, blurring my vision. Pain is just information, I told myself, repeating the drill sergeant's mantra. It tells you you're still alive. I dragged my legs through, inch by inch, suppressing the urge to vomit from the agony. I tumbled onto the concrete floor of the basement, landing in a crouch. I stayed there for a full minute, breathing through my nose, waiting for the fire in my belly to subside to a dull roar. Then, the smell hit me. It wasn't the smell of a damp basement. It was the smell of sawdust, motor oil, and Old Spice. It was the smell of my father. This was his sanctuary, his workshop. To my left, in the gloom, I could make out the silhouette of his workbench, his tools hanging on the pegboard in perfect order. A wave of grief washed over me, so potent it nearly knocked me off my balance. I wanted to turn on the light and see his handwriting on the project notes one last time. Focus, Hughes. Mission first. I clicked on the tactical flashlight, keeping my hand over the lens to filter the beam into a dull red glow. I moved toward the utility corner. The furnace was humming softly, a rhythmic metallic heartbeat. Next to it stood the massive water heater. Behind the water heater, I whispered. I squeezed into the narrow gap between the tank and the wall. It was tight, dusty, and festooned with cobwebs. I ran my gloved fingers along the drywall. It looked solid. But Dad was a master carpenter. I tapped the wall. Thud. Thud. I moved my hand 6 inches to the right. Hollow clunk, there it was. I used the tip of the knife to pry at the seam. A square section of the drywall, perfectly cut and concealed with joint compound tape that hadn't been painted over, popped loose. I pulled the panel away. Nestled in the stud bay, bolted to the foundation, was a small gun vault safe. I didn't need a key. It had a digital keypad. August 12, 1965. My trembling fingers punched in the numbers 0, 8, 1, 2, 6, and 5. The green light blinked. The internal solenoid clicked. The door sprang open. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I shone the light inside. It wasn't money. There were 3 items. First, a small digital voice recorder. Second, a leather-bound field notebook. Third, an amber prescription bottle with the label scraped off. Inside rattled a dozen small white pills. Gotcha, I whispered. This was the smoking gun. This was the insurance policy. I reached for the recorder, my hand halfway into the safe. Creak! The sound came from directly above my head. It was the distinct, high-pitched whine of the floorboard in the hallway leading to the kitchen. I froze. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. I switched off the flashlight instantly, plunging the basement back into pitch blackness. Thump, thump, thump. Heavy footsteps. Uneven, sluggish. Will. He was awake. I pressed myself back against the cold concrete foundation, making myself as small as possible. The floorboards above were uninsulated. I could hear everything. I heard the refrigerator door open, the clink of a glass bottle, the glug of liquid. Then, the footsteps didn't go back to the bedroom. They moved toward the basement door. My blood ran cold. The basement door was at the top of the stairs, 20 feet away from me. The doorknob rattled. Then, the door opened. A wedge of yellow light formed the kitchen sliced down the stairs, cutting through the darkness of the basement. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. The light stopped just inches from my boots. I gripped the handle of the hunting knife. If he came down those stairs, if he saw me, I was cornered. I was injured. I would have to fight. And in a confined space against a man heavier than me, with a weapon, it would get ugly fast. Hello? Will's voice drifted down. It sounded thick, slurred. Who's down there? He must have heard the safe click. Or maybe he just sensed something. The paranoia of a guilty man. I held my breath until my lungs burned. I became a statue. Will stood at the top of the stairs for what felt like an eternity. I could hear his heavy breathing. I could smell the faint waft of stale alcohol drifting down. He took one step onto the first stair. The wood groaned under his weight. My muscles coiled. I prepared to launch myself. Then, he stopped. Damn rats, he muttered. He stepped back. He slammed the door shut. The lock clicked. The darkness returned, absolute and suffocating. I let out a breath that was more of a shudder. He didn't come down. Of course he didn't. Will Henderson was a coward. He was afraid of the dark. He was afraid of the basement where his dead stepfather's tools still hung on the wall like accusations. He was afraid of ghosts. And tonight, he was right to be. I quickly shoved the recorder, the notebook, and the pill bottle into the deep cargo pockets of my pants. I closed the safe, replaced the false panel, and smoothed the dust over it. I retreated to the window well, the adrenaline masking the pain in my stomach. I hauled myself out into the snowy night, rolling onto the frozen grass. I lay there for a second, looking up at the indifferent slate-gray sky. Snowflakes melted on my hot face. I patted my pocket. I had the truth. The war wasn't over. But for the first time since I came home, I had ammunition. If you are listening to this and you believe that the truth is worth fighting for, no matter the risk, hit that like button right now. Leave a comment below saying, "I seek the truth, so I know there are still people out there who value justice over comfort." I disappeared into the trees, heading back to Margie's. The hunt was on. The fluorescent lights of Dr. Nathan's private lab hummed with a low electric buzz that drilled straight into my skull. It was 10 a.m., but it felt like midnight. The air smelled of rubbing alcohol and latex, a scent that usually meant healing, but today it smelled like a crime scene. Nathan, a man I'd known since high school football days, sat on a rolling stool in front of his mass spectrometer. He wasn't the jovial quarterback anymore. His face was pale, his jaw set tight. He held a printout in his trembling hand. "Tell me," I said. I was leaning against the metal counter, my arms crossed over my chest to protect the fresh bandages Margie had applied that morning. Nathan took off his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose. "I ran the analysis on the pills you found in the safe, and I cross-referenced it with the blood sample we managed to pull from Frank's old glucose monitor strips that Margie saved." "And?" Margie asked. She was pacing the small room, smoking a cigarette that Nathan hadn't bothered to tell her to put out. "The pills in the bottle aren't vitamins, Lola," Nathan said, his voice quiet. "They're a compound mixture, mostly filler, sugar, and flour. But the active ingredient is digoxin." "Digoxin," I repeated. "Heart medication." "Right. It's used to treat atrial fibrillation and heart failure," Nathan explained, tapping the paper. "But the therapeutic window is tiny. Too little does nothing. Too much, it causes toxicity. Nausea, confusion, visual disturbances." He looked up at me, his eyes dark. "And eventually, cardiac arrest. It stops the heart in diastole. If a coroner isn't looking for it specifically, it looks exactly like a natural heart attack." The room spun slightly. How much was in the pills? "Enough to kill a horse if taken all at once," Nathan said. "But in small daily doses, it would be a slow, agonizing decline. He would have felt weak, dizzy. He would have felt like he was losing his mind." I closed my eyes. The confusion the nurse had talked about. The delirium. It wasn't dementia. He was being poisoned. "It gets worse," Nathan said. I checked the prescription database. Veronica doesn't have a prescription for digoxin, but her mother in Arizona does. "She was smuggling it in," Margie growled. "That witch." I reached into my pocket and pulled out the leather-bound notebook I had retrieved from the safe. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it felt like ice in my veins. "He knew," I whispered. I opened the book to the last entry, dated 2 days before he died. The handwriting, usually bold and architectural, was shaky and spider-like. I read it aloud, my voice echoing in the sterile lab. December 14th. The soup tasted bitter again. I didn't eat it, but I feel the fluttering in my chest. I know what she is doing. I saw the bottle in her purse when she was asleep. I should call the police. I should kick her out. But I can't. Not yet. I need the password to the offshore account. If I die now, she gets everything and Lola gets nothing. I have to play the fool a little longer. Just a few more days. I paused, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Lola, if you are reading this, please forgive me. I wanted to protect you. I wanted to leave you a kingdom, but I've left you a mess. I am a coward for not fighting back sooner. I love you, Peanut." "Dad." A tear escaped, tracking hot down my cheek. I wiped it away furiously. He wasn't a coward, I said, slamming the book shut. He was undercover. He was enduring torture to try and secure my future. And look at this, Margie said. She pulled a cracked iPad out of her oversized tote bag. I found this in their trash bin last week. Screen was smashed, but I got it to turn on. She swiped the screen with a vindictive force. Open Safari. Look at the search history from November. I leaned over. The list was a digital confession. Nov. 3. Symptoms of digoxin, overdose in elderly. Nov. 10. Does autopsy detect heart medication? Nov. 12. How long for digoxin to leave bloodstream? Nov. 20. Montana inheritance laws no will. She Googled how to kill him, I said, staring at the screen. She treated murder like a DIY home improvement project. This is it, Nathan said. Between the toxicology report on the pills, the diary, and the search history, you have them. Not yet. A gruff voice came from the doorway. We all turned. Detective Riley was standing there. He was a bear of a man, wearing a cheap suit and a permanent scowl. He was one of the few cops in Iron Creek who hadn't been bought by Will's country club buddies. Riley walked in, took the iPad from Margie, and scrolled through it. He listened to the snippet of the audio recording I played, Frank arguing with Veronica about money, her voice shrill and threatening. Riley slammed his fist onto the metal counter. Bang! Son of a bitch, he muttered. I knew Will was a snake, but this is capital murder. So arrest them, I said. Go kick down their door. Riley shook his head. It's circumstantial, Lola. Strong, but circumstantial. A good lawyer, and Will has expensive ones, will tear this apart. They'll say Frank was senile and wrote the diary in a delusion. They'll say the pills were for his condition. They'll say anyone could have used that iPad. So we just let them get away with it? Margie demanded. No, Riley said, his eyes narrowing. We need the nail in the coffin. We need a confession. Or we need them to lead us directly to the stolen money. He looked at me. We need them to admit, on tape, that they did it. We need to catch them in the act of trying to cover it up. I looked at the evidence spread out on the table. The pills, the book, the iPad. It was a puzzle, but we were missing the final piece. Will is greedy, I said slowly, and Veronica is arrogant. That is their weakness. A plan began to form in my mind. It was risky. It was dangerous. It involved walking right back into the lion's den. Will thinks I'm broken, I said. He thinks I'm desperate for cash. He thinks I'm leaving town. So? Riley asked. So? I smiled, but it didn't reach my eyes. I'm going to give him exactly what he wants. I'm going to offer him a deal. I'll tell him I found a secret account, a Swiss bank account that Dad left. But only I have the code. Margie's eyes lit up. The Trojan horse. Exactly, I said. Greed will make them careless. They'll meet me to get that code, and when they do, we'll be wearing wires. Riley nodded slowly, a grim smile forming on his face. Entrapment is tricky, but if you initiate the meeting for a settlement and they start bragging, that's admissible. I'm ready, I said. I'm going to call Will. I'm going to play the defeated sister, and I'm going to lead them right into the slaughterhouse. I looked at the jar of pills one last time. Veronica had used poison to stop my father's heart. I was going to use the truth to stop hers. Let's set the trap, I said. Operation Alpha is a go. The kitchen table at Margie's cabin had been transformed into a field command post. Detective Riley sat with headphones around his neck, adjusting the levels on a digital recording device. Margie was nervously polishing her glasses. I stood by the sink, holding a half-empty bottle of cheap bourbon. I wasn't drinking it. I took a mouthful, swished it around my gums, and spat it out. Then I poured a generous splash onto the collar of my flannel shirt and dabbed some behind my ears like a twisted perfume. You smell like a dive bar on a Tuesday morning, Margie noted, wrinkling her nose. Good, I said, rubbing my eyes until they were red and irritated. That's the objective. Will needs to hear the defeat in my voice. He needs to smell the desperation when I walk into that room. I looked at Riley. Are we rolling? Recording is live, Riley said, giving me a thumbs up. Remember, get him to agree to the exchange. Quid pro quo. Money for silence. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over Will's contact info. I took a deep breath, slumped my shoulders, and let my jaw go slack. I dialed. It rang 4 times. I was about to hang up when he answered. What do you want, Lola? Will's voice was loud, accompanied by the background noise of a televised football game. He sounded annoyed, but not threatened. To him, I was already history. Will? I slurred my speech slightly, pitching my voice up to sound tremulous and on the verge of tears. It's me. Please, don't hang up. I'm busy, Lola. Unless you're calling to tell me you're leaving town, I don't have time for your drama. I am, I sobbed into the receiver. I'm leaving. You won, okay? You and Veronica, you win. I can't fight you. I don't have any money for a lawyer. I'm tired, Will. I'm so tired. There was a pause. I could practically hear his ego inflating on the other end of the line. Well, I'm glad you finally came to your senses. Dad wanted the business to stay with the people who actually built it, not someone who ran off to play soldier. I know, I whimpered. I'm sitting here in my truck, Will. It won't start. I have $70 to my name. I just want to go to Vegas, start over. I'll sign the waiver. I'll sign whatever you want. You'll sign the waiver renouncing all claims to the estate? Will asked, his voice sharpening with interest. Yes, everything. I need $5,000, Will. Just enough to fix my truck and get a room for a month. Please, just $5,000 and you'll never see me again. Will laughed. It was a cruel, barking sound. $5,000? You think I'm a charity? You can sign the papers for free or I can let the sheriff arrest you for harassment. I signaled to Riley. It was time to deploy the payload. Okay, I sniffled. Okay, fine. I guess I don't have a choice. It's just a shame about the Swiss account. What? The football game in the background suddenly went silent. Someone had muted the TV. What Swiss account? The one in Dad's private ledger. I lied, keeping my voice shaky but loud enough to be clear. I found a notebook in his old tool chest. He was worried about the IRS auditing the company, so he moved some of the cash reserves offshore. UBS Bank in Zurich, $2 million. You're lying, Will said, but his voice lacked conviction. He was a thief. He naturally assumed everyone else was hiding money too. I have the account number, I said. But it's encrypted. Dad used a cipher. I figured it out this morning. It uses military grid coordinates. But if you don't want it, I guess I'll just leave. Maybe the bank keeps it if nobody claims it. Wait, Will said quickly. Wait a minute. I heard muffled whispering. Veronica was coaching him. Bring the notebook, Will said, his tone dropping to a greedy command. Come to the company office, now. If the account is real, I'll give you your $5,000, cash. You promise? I asked, putting a wobble in my voice. I just want to leave, Will. Yeah, I promise. Just get your ass over here. Henderson Construction Office, 20 minutes. He hung up. I lowered the phone and straightened my spine. The slur vanished. The tears stopped instantly. He swallowed the hook, I said, my voice cold and steady. Line and sinker. Greedy bastard, Riley muttered, stopping the recording. He didn't even question it. He's so used to skimming money, he assumes Frank did the same. We have a 20-minute window, I said. Let's move. Margie walked into the bedroom and came out holding a garment bag. She unzipped it with reverence. Inside hung my Army service uniform, the dress blues. Yesterday, it had been a muddy, disgraced mess lying in the snow. Today, it was immaculate. Margie had spent the entire day spot cleaning, steaming, and pressing every inch of the midnight blue fabric. The gold stripe on the trousers gleamed. The buttons shone like little suns. I couldn't save the white shirt, Margie said softly. But I bought you a new one at the surplus store in town. It should fit. I touched the fabric. It felt like reclaiming my skin. Thank you, Margie. I stripped off my flannel shirt and jeans right there in the kitchen. I didn't care about modesty. I was putting on my armor. I pulled on the trousers, fastening the belt. I buttoned the crisp white shirt, attaching the black tie with military precision. Then came the jacket. I slid my arms into the sleeves, feeling the weight of the wool settle on my shoulders. Margie handed me my ribbon rack. I pinned it over my heart. Bronze star, Purple Heart, Army Commendation Medal. Each one was a story of survival. Each one was proof that I had walked through fire before. I looked in the hallway mirror. The bruise on my cheek was still purple, but against the sharp lines of the uniform, it didn't look like a victim's mark anymore. It looked like war paint. "You look like a soldier," Riley said, standing up. He held out a small black button. "Now let's turn you into a spy." He replaced the second button of my jacket with the camera lens. It was indistinguishable from the standard issue buttons. He taped the small battery pack and transmitter to the inside of the jacket, running the wire down my side. "Audio and video are synced to the van outside," Riley said. "I'll be listening. The second, and I mean the second, they admit to the poisoning or the fraud, I'm kicking the door in." "Copy that," I said. I looked down at myself. I looked powerful. Too powerful. Will needed to see a broken woman, not a sergeant. I reached for my old, stained, oversized parka, the one I had been wearing when I arrived. I put it on over the uniform, zipping it up to my chin. The baggy coat completely swallowed the dress blues. To the outside world, I was just a homeless, disheveled girl in dirty clothes. "The Trojan horse," Margie whispered, adjusting the collar of the dirty coat to hide the white shirt underneath. "He thinks he's meeting a beggar," I said, checking the hidden knife in my boot one last time. "He has no idea he's inviting a firing squad into his office." I grabbed the fake ledger, Dad's old notebook with some random numbers I had scribbled in the back, and headed for the door. "Lola," Margie called out. I turned back. She was holding her rosary beads tight in her hand. "Give 'em hell, kid," I smiled. "That's the mission parameter." I walked out into the night. The snow had stopped, but the wind was cutting. I climbed into my truck and started the engine. The drive to the office was short. I drove slowly, letting the anger build, compressing it into a tight, dense core of energy. Will and Veronica were waiting for their payday. They were waiting to dance on my father's grave one last time. I shifted the truck into drive. Each hour has arrived. The executive conference room of Henderson Construction smelled of stale cigar smoke, expensive leather, and arrogance. It was a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the snow-covered lumber yard, a kingdom my father had built from scratch, now occupied by usurpers. Will sat at the head of the massive mahogany table, looking like a king on a throne. He was swirling a glass of amber scotch, his feet propped up on the polished wood. Veronica sat to his right, filing her nails, looking bored. I shuffled into the room, keeping my head down, letting the oversized, dirty parka swallow my frame. I clutched the fake notebook to my chest, like a lifeline. "You're late," Will said, not bothering to look at his watch. He gestured to the empty chair at the far end of the table. "Sit." I didn't sit. I stayed standing, projecting the image of a nervous animal ready to bolt. "Did you bring the money?" I asked, my voice trembling just enough to sell the performance. Will smirked. He reached under the table and tossed a thick envelope onto the mahogany surface. It slid across the wood and stopped in front of me. $5,000. Small bills. Just like you asked, Will said. "Now, give me the notebook with the account codes and sign the waiver." He slid a single sheet of paper toward me. Voluntary relinquishment of estate rights. I reached out a shaking hand and picked up the pen. "Is the money real?" I asked. "It's real," Veronica snapped, blowing on her nails. "Just sign the damn paper, Lola, and get out of our lives. You smell like a wet dog." I opened the notebook and placed it on the table. "The code is on the last page," I lied. Will's eyes lit up with greed. He leaned forward, his hand twitching toward the book. I looked at the waiver. I looked at Will. Then, I looked directly into the hidden camera lens disguised as a button on my chest. Showtime. I pressed the pen to the paper, but I didn't sign my name. In bold, jagged letters, I wrote, "Signed, the person who is putting you in federal prison." I dropped the pen. It clattered loudly on the wood. Done, I said, my voice suddenly devoid of any tremor. It was cold, hard, and flat. Will frowned, sensing the shift in tone. He snatched the paper. What is this? What did you write? He read the sentence. His face went slack. What the hell is this? That, I said, reaching for the zipper of my parka, is your resignation. I unzipped the dirty coat in one swift motion and let it slide off my shoulders to the floor. The transformation was instant. The midnight blue wool of my dress blues absorbed the office light. The gold stripe down my trousers was a sharp line of discipline. The medals on my chest, the bronze star, the purple heart, clinked softly as I straightened my spine. I wasn't the broken sister anymore. I was Sergeant Hughes, and I was on duty. Will and Veronica stared, their mouths slightly open. They couldn't process the image. You, Veronica stammered. What are you wearing? I didn't answer. I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit play. My father's voice, raspy and weak but undeniable, filled the room through the speaker. I know what she is doing. I saw the bottle in her purse. I need the password. Lola, forgive me. Veronica dropped her nail file. Her face turned the color of ash. I reached into my pocket and slammed the amber pill bottle onto the table. Bang! Digoxin, I announced, my voice booming in the silent room. Dr. Nathan finished the toxicology report an hour ago, and Margie found your search history, Veronica. How to poison a husband without getting caught. You didn't just kill him, you tortured him. That's a lie, Veronica shrieked, standing up, knocking her chair over. He was sick. And you, Will, I turned my gaze to him. Embezzlement, $300,000 in company funds diverted to personal assets. We have the forensic accounting records. And we have you on tape, right now, trying to bribe me to cover it up. Will looked at the envelope of cash, then at the notebook, then at me. The realization hit him. There was no Swiss account. It was a trap. Panic turned to primal rage. His face twisted into an ugly snarl. He grabbed the heavy crystal Scotch decanter from the table. You bitch! Will roared. You think you can come in here and ruin me? He lunged. It was a clumsy barroom charge. He raised the heavy glass bottle, aiming for my head. My stomach screamed in protest as I moved, the stitches pulling tight against my skin, but the adrenaline overrode the pain. I didn't retreat. I stepped into his space. Close quarters combat. Principle 1, control the weapon. As his arm came down, I blocked his forearm with my left wrist, stopping the momentum of the bottle. At the same time, I drove my right hand into his throat, striking the vagus nerve. Will gagged, his eyes bugging out. He stumbled back, but I didn't let him go. I grabbed his right wrist with both hands, twisting it outward, locking the joint against the natural range of motion. He dropped the bottle. It shattered on the floor, splashing scotch and glass everywhere. You wanted a fight, Will? I hissed through gritted teeth. You got one. I used his own momentum against him. I spun, torquing his arm behind his back in a hammerlock, and drove him forward. Slam. I smashed his face into the mahogany table. The sound of cartilage crunching against wood was sickening and satisfying. Blood from his nose sprayed across the voluntary relinquishment papers. He tried to push up, struggling like a trapped bull. I jammed my forearm into the back of his neck, pinning his head to the table. The pain in my abdomen was blinding, a hot knife twisting in my gut, but I channeled it into my grip. I leaned down, my lips inches from his bleeding ear. This is for the baby you laughed about, I whispered, tightening the lock on his arm until he whimpered. And this is for the father you betrayed. Get off him, Veronica screamed, rushing toward me with her long fingernails aimed at my face. Crash! The office door flew open, hitting the wall with enough force to crack the plaster. Police! Nobody move! Detective Riley stormed in, his service weapon drawn, followed by 2 uniformed officers. Hands! Let me see your hands, Riley bellowed. Veronica froze, her hands trembling in the air. She looked small, frail, and pathetic, stripped of her fur coat and her arrogance. I didn't let go of Will until Riley was right beside me. I've got him, Sergeant, Riley said, holstering his gun and pulling out his cuffs. Stand down. I released Will's arm and stepped back, gasping for air. My hand went to my stomach instinctually. I was dizzy, but I was standing tall. Riley hauled Will up from the table. Blood was streaming down Will's chin, staining his expensive silk tie. Click. Click. The sound of the handcuffs ratcheting shut was the sweetest music I had ever heard. William Henderson, Veronica Henderson, Riley recited, his voice booming with authority. You are under arrest for the murder of Frank Hughes, embezzlement, and attempted fraud. You have the right to remain silent. I watched as the officers cuffed Veronica. She was sobbing now, mascara running down her face, begging Will to do something. But Will couldn't do anything. He was staring at me. He looked at my uniform. He looked at the medals. And for the first time in his life, he looked afraid. I picked up the fake notebook from the table. I walked over to Will as the officers began to drag him out. You wanted the code? I asked softly. I leaned in and whispered. The code was honor. But you never knew what that meant. I turned and walked to the window, looking out at the lumber yard my father built. The snow was falling again, covering the tracks, covering the dirt. Behind me, the door closed, taking the monsters away. The room was silent, save for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the corner. My knees finally gave out. I sank into one of the leather chairs, wincing as my body caught up with my mind. I was bleeding again. I could feel the warmth on my bandages. But as I looked at my reflection in the darkened window, the sharp silhouette of the dress uniform, I didn't see a victim. I saw the daughter my father raised. Mission accomplished, Dad. I whispered to the empty room. Target neutralized. The sound of the judge's gavel hitting the mahogany block was louder than any gunshot I had heard in combat. It was a sharp, final crack that split the air in the crowded county courtroom, severing the past from the future. Crack. In the matter of the People versus Veronica Henderson, Judge Miller's voice boomed, echoing off the high ceilings. On the charge of murder in the first degree, this court finds you guilty. You are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Veronica didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just slumped in her chair, the orange jumpsuit washing out her pale complexion. The Black Widow had finally been caught in her own web. And in the matter of William Henderson, the judge continued, shifting his gaze to my stepbrother. Will looked smaller than I had ever seen him. His expensive suits were gone, replaced by county-issue drab. He was shaking. On the charges of embezzlement, fraud, and accessory to murder, you are sentenced to 25 years in a federal penitentiary. A collective breath seemed to leave the room. I sat in the front row, my hands clasped tightly in my lap. Margie sat on my left, dabbing her eyes with a handkerchief. Detective Riley sat on my right, a grim, satisfied smile on his face. As the bailiffs hauled them away, Will looked back one last time. Our eyes met. He didn't see the broken sister he had tried to bully. He saw the soldier who had outmaneuvered him. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just nodded, once. Dismissed. Outside on the courthouse steps, the media was waiting. But this time, I wasn't hiding. Sheriff Riley stepped up to the microphones. For months, rumors have circulated about the death of Frank Hughes. Today, the truth is out. Frank Hughes was a good man who was betrayed by those closest to him, and his daughter, Sergeant Lola Hughes, is the reason justice was served today. She is a hero, both abroad and at home. The cameras flashed, but the light didn't blind me anymore. It felt like the sun coming out after a long, dark winter. 3 months later, the sign above the lumber yard changed. The gaudy gold lettering of Henderson Construction was taken down. In its place, we hung a simple, sturdy sign carved from local timber, Hughes and Partners. I stood in the parking lot wearing work boots and a hard hat, watching the crew secure the sign. It looks good, boss, a voice rasped beside me. I turned to see Margie. She wasn't wearing her bathrobe or holding a shotgun. She was wearing a sharp navy blazer and holding a clipboard. I had appointed her chief financial officer the day after the trial. It looks right. I corrected her. And stop calling me boss. You sign the checks, you're the boss, Margie argued, checking her spreadsheet. Speaking of which, the profit-sharing meeting is at noon. The guys are excited. Nobody's ever offered them equity before. They built this company, I said, watching the foreman getting to work. Will treated them like machinery. Dad treated them like family. We're going back to Dad's way. We walked into the office. I had gutted Will's pretentious executive suite. The humidors were gone. The liquor cabinet was gone. Now it was an open workspace covered in blueprints and permit applications. We were winning bids again, honest bids. The town of Iron Creek was healing, and so was the company that built it. But the biggest renovation was happening at home. That evening, I stood in the living room of my father's house. The furniture was covered in drop cloths. The heavy, suffocating velvet curtains Veronica loved were in a dumpster somewhere. Ready for the second coat? I turned to see Nathan walking in from the kitchen, holding 2 paint rollers. He had paint smudged on his nose and a pizza box tucked under his arm. Sage green, I said, looking at the test patch on the wall. It breathes. It feels alive. It's a lot better than depression gray, Nathan joked, handing me a slice of pepperoni. We sat on the floor, eating dinner surrounded by cans of paint. Nathan had been my rock through the trial. He had testified about the toxicology report, he had held my hand when the stress became too much, and he had made me laugh when I thought I'd forgotten how. You know, Nathan said, wiping his hands on a rag. The town is talking. Let them talk, I said. What are they saying now? They're saying that Sergeant Hughes and Dr. Nathan make a pretty good team. He looked at me, his eyes warm and serious. They're saying maybe the sergeant is finally home for good. I looked at this man, kind, steady, and patient. He wasn't a mission to be completed. He was a future to be built. I leaned in and kissed him. It tasted like pizza and promise. The sergeant is definitely home, I whispered. 1 year later. The Montana winter had finally broken. The snow on the peaks was melting, feeding the rivers that rushed through the valley. The meadows were exploding with wildflowers, Indian paintbrush and lupine painting the hills in reds and purples. I parked the truck at the iron gates of the cemetery. The air was crisp, but it carried the scent of wet earth and growing things. It was a Chinook wind, a warm wind that signaled the end of the freeze. I walked up the path, the gravel crunching softly under my boots. But this time, I wasn't walking alone, and I wasn't walking with the weight of the world on my shoulders. I was carrying a bundle wrapped in a soft blue blanket against my chest. I stopped in front of the granite headstone. It was clean and polished. Frank Hughes, beloved father. Honest builder. 1952-2018. I knelt down in the grass, shifting the bundle in my arms. Hey, Dad, I said softly. I brought someone to meet you. I pulled back the edge of the blanket. A pair of bright blue eyes blinked up at the sunlight, and a small chubby hand reached out to grab my finger. This is Frank, I said, my voice catching in my throat. Frankie. He's got your chin. And definitely your stubbornness. Little Frank cooed, kicking his legs. He was 6 months old, healthy and safe. He would never know the fear I felt in that clinic. He would never know the coldness of being turned away from his own door. He would grow up in a house filled with light, running through a lumber yard built on honor. I traced the letters of my father's name on the stone. We did it, Dad, I told him. The company is thriving. Margie is terrifying the auditors. Nathan is wonderful, and Will and Veronica can never hurt us again. I pulled the challenge coin from my pocket, the one I had found in the mud that terrible night. I pressed it into the soft earth at the base of the headstone. I stood up, adjusting baby Frank in my arms. I looked out over the valley at the town of Iron Creek nestled below the mountains. It was no longer a place of ambush. It was a perimeter I had secured. I snapped a sharp salute to the grave. Mission accomplished, sir, I whispered. The squad is secure, standing down. I turned and walked back toward the truck, where Nathan was waiting for us, leaning against the door with a smile. The wind blew through my hair, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't look back. I just looked forward, into the sunrise. Looking back at the war I fought right here in Iron Creek, I learned the most valuable lesson of my life. Family is not defined by whose blood runs in your veins, but by who is willing to bleed for you. I spent years hurting because my stepbrother and stepmother didn't love me, thinking I was the problem. But I realized that toxic people will always try to burn your house down to keep themselves warm. You don't owe them your silence, and you certainly don't owe them your forgiveness just because you share a last name. True family are the people like Margie and Nathan, the ones who hand you a weapon when you're cornered and help you rebuild when the dust settles. Never let anyone take your dignity. It's the one piece of real estate they can never inherit unless you sign it away. Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had a Margie in your life? Someone who stood by you when the rest of the world turned away? Or maybe you've had to stand your ground against a bully like Will. If my story gave you the courage to draw a line in the sand, please hit that like button. It helps us share this message with others who might be feeling alone in their own battles. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel is our squad, and I want you on the front lines for the next story. Tell me your story in the comments below. I'll be reading them. Stay strong, stay safe, and never stop fighting for what's right.